Hello everyone, this is part 20 of What If Naruto Was the God of Taijutsu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Hiashi gasped for breath as he glared at the one enemy in front of him. The enemy that had once been the person he was closest to in life. He alone faced his wife, Hyuga Kana. With his 360-degree vision he could see the members of the barrier squad behind him frantically working at tearing down the black walls that separated him from his daughter. He was the last defense between them and his wife. They had been fighting fairly evenly for a good while now, but Hiashi was finding it hard to take any kind of advantage. She was throwing what seemed like an endless stream of senbon and he had to constantly keep his rotation active to effectively bat them aside. "You, help him," the commander of the barrier squad yelled to one of his men. "Yes sir." One of the members quit working and charged at Kana with his kunai drawn. "You fool. Don't engage her in taijutsu." Hiashi yelled too late. Kana slipped into what could have at first been mistaken as a Urokan fighting stance. However, the key differences were she only held a single finger extended and her stance was held much more loosely. The barrier shinobi swung at her and she stepped ever so lightly to the side, bringing her finger forward as she did. She struck him just below the elbow and then in the shoulder. What? The man's arm fell limply to his side. Without even pausing, she then struck him with just one finger right in his spine. The man collapsed to the ground, completely immobile. What did she do? The commander couldn't believe his subordinate had been taken down so fast. My wife may be a Hyuga without the eyes, but she learned to turn that into a great advantage. By learning about special pressure points on the human body, she is able to shut you down with just a simple touch. She can accurately hit those points with senbon needles, so she is not limited to just taijutsu. She is also a master of poisons that paralyze or dull the reflexes. The commander grimaced. That's quite the troublesome opponent. Hiashi nodded but couldn't help but think about how much of an understatement that was. Don't send any more of your men to battle her. And I alone shall be her opponent. You got it. The commander of the barrier squad agreed, not willing to lose any more men to the fierce Hyuga woman. Kaiten. He completed his rotation, knocking the senbon needles aside. You won't be getting a step closer to these men, he declared loudly. You can't hold me off forever, Hiashi. You need to seal me somehow. Kana already had more needles as she said this. How am I supposed to do that? Hiashi asked as he furrowed his brow in frustration. You should leave that to me, Hyuga-san. Hiashi didn't bother to turn his head as a single Sunagakure Kunoiki arrived. He had seen her coming a long time ago. The barrier members, however, looked completely surprised. What is Sunagakure doing here? Under orders of Kazekage-sama, we are backing up this village, the Kunoiki said as she landed next to Hiashi. My name is Maki and I happen to be a capable sealing jutsu specialist. Hiashi nodded, impressed. I appreciate your help. I'll go in and create an opening for you. I'm sorry, Hiashi. I won't go down quite that easily, Kana said as she slowly approached her husband and her new opponent. Kana, Hiashi had to stop himself from reaching up and clutching at the skin around his heart. He swore silently to rip Kabuto apart the very moment he got inside that barrier. Let's end this. He charged right at his wife, who slipped into her taijutsu stance. He swung his palm forward and Kana attacked with her fingers extended. For a few moments they battled so eloquently, an onlooker may have thought they were dancing as they dodged and weaved around one another while trying to land a battle-ending strike. Finally, Hiashi ducked under a strike and extended both hands forward. He caught his wife hard in the gut. She was knocked off her feet and landed on her backside. Kana, I'm sorry, Hiashi mumbled as he pulled his hands back and then jumped next to Maki. The rest is on you, Maki-san. No problem. Maki pulled out a giant roll of cloth and slung it forward. The clothing just began to wrap around Kana. I truly am sorry, Hiashi, Kana whispered when just her face was left exposed. The senbon she had been throwing that lay around Hiashi's and Maki's feet burst open and small amounts of purple smoke drifted out of them. Damn, paralysis poison, Both Hiashi and Maki dropped to their knees. I should have seen that coming. You always used to store the smoke inside your senbon. Unable to move, neither of them were able to do anything as Kana freed herself. Damn it, we lost. Maki cursed as she fell to the ground, unconscious. Kana then walked past her husband and approached the barrier squad. Damn it, let's get her men. All the remaining members of the barrier squad quit their work and charged at once. With almost no effort, Kana put them all down with what appeared to be practiced ease. Her taijutsu stance was truly something to be feared. Hiashi alone remained conscious. The difference is this time where he had already failed to protect the barrier squad and now he could barely move. Kana slowly approached his kneeling form. Hiashi bit his lip as he cursed inside his head. If our daughter managed to break free from the effects of paralysis, then I should be able to as well. Hiashi knew he could probably temporarily overcome the effects, but what was the point? Could he beat this immortal? He wondered these things as his eyes scanned them, looking for some kind of weakness. Kana was now right in front of him, and at this closer range, Hiashi finally saw something. It was small and wasn't much, but it appeared to be a kunai with a small tag with a written code inside of her body. That's it, that's how he makes you move. Everything clicked inside of Hiashi's head. Hiashi inclined his head ever so slightly. Kana, I love you. Hiashi then raised his head to stare at her. Before she could react, Hiashi's body sprang swiftly into action. His arm struck only once, but that was enough, he realized as the tag within her body crumbled apart. What? Kana collapsed to her knees, in front of her husband. I attacked the codes commanding your movements. While your soul is still anchored to this word, you can no longer do anything. Hiashi stated blandly, however he was surprised to see that just a moment later her body began crumbling apart. I don't understand. Hiashi whispered gently. This shouldn't be happening. Kana smiled sadly at her husband. Just one last time, Hiashi, she mumbled as her arm slowly began to lift itself up. Impossible, how can you move? Hiashi couldn't believe it as Kana's hand slowly wrapped around the back of his head. Her purple eyes closed as she leaned her head forward and managed to give Hiashi one last SK. Love is strangely powerful, Hiashi. She whispered as she pulled back and tilted her head slightly. Her dark blue hair that was tied up in a bun bounced slightly from the movement. As she completely crumbled away, Hiashi saw the tears in her eyes. I wish I could have seen our daughters just one more time. The dust that had once been her whispered as her soul left the planet entirely. Hiashi sat completely still, paralyzed not just by the poison now, but by his own emotions. Tears slowly began to slide down his cheeks. How strange. He couldn't even remember the last time he cried. Finally, his body gave out completely and he fell to the ground on his stomach. His head that rested on the concrete was turned so he could stare at the barrier that trapped Hinata. My daughter, hit that bastard extra hard for me. The wind blew strongly in the Hokage's face, forcing him to squint his eyes slightly as the wave of golden dust he and the Kazekage rode on took them ever closer to the massive tree where almost every shinobi in the entire village battled. Are you ready, old man? The Kazekage spoke with a small hint of amusement in his voice. The Hokage somehow managed to let out a small chuckle in response to the much younger Kage's question. He felt a lot of tension leave his shoulders as he did. Please, this old body has been aching for a battle. I'm not the type of man to let all my subordinates do the work. That ache may be more than waiting for a battle. I'm glad you feel that way, however. We're here. With a flick of his fingers, the giant wave of gold skid to a stop and both Kage jumped off of it and right onto the trunk of the massive tree. Hokage-sama. Many Konoha shinobi shouted in acknowledgement to the presence of their leader. Not a single one of them turned to greet him, however, as they continued to battle against their foes. The Hokage was impressed to note that they were beginning to pull ahead by a wide margin thanks to the efforts of all the Sunagakure shinobi present as well. Surviving the invasion that had started out so bleak was becoming more and more possible. Enma, extend. Sarutobi shouted as he swung his staff forward. Enma shot out in a straight line and impaled the Otogakure shinobi that had been engaged in combat with Nara Shikaku. The clan head took the hint and immediately landed next to his Hokage, his head bowed low. Sir, what is it you request? The Kazekage turned and blasted a group of approaching men away with his gold dust while the older man turned to his subordinate. I want a status report on what is going on here. What is most pressing situation and how many of the you are left? Sir, to my knowledge only 2 of them are left at the moment. Might Guy is engaged with his sensei, Seikuhiro beneath this great tree and Hitaki Kakashi is currently engaged with Nadime-sama on the other side of the trunk. The most pressing concern is the still countless Abumi Zaku who are running the tree and attempting to set it ablaze. The Hokage felt his heart wrench when Shikaku mentioned the Nadime. The Kazekage appeared oblivious to this as he spoke up. We should definitely deal with the former Hokage before worrying about anyone else. Both our combined strength combined with the copy ninja could surely take him down with little s. Shikaku inclined his head. He knew what he was about to say was over his bounds, but he also understood what had to be done. Kazekage-sama is correct. At the moment, Nadime-sama poses the greatest threat to everything Shodai-sama himself for. The old man nodded stiffly. Yes, of course, he said with a dry voice. We shall move to take him down immediately. Shikaku, as you were. Sir. Shikaku got up and rejoined the battle but not without a quick glance back at his leader. The Kazekage turned back to all the Zakus flying around. Annoying pests, he said in disgust as he moved his hands exaggeratedly. The golden dust lurched upwards and enveloped them before it crushed them. I have a team dispatched to take care of them already. The Hokage said as he began running along the length of the trunk, making way to where the Nadime was supposed to be fighting. Prudent as always, the Kazekage was after him in a flash. I hope they take care of the job soon. The sight of those things flying around like tiny insects continues to annoy me. The gold dust took the form of a giant stream as it followed after him. There they are, the Hokage shouted after a minute of scanning the tree for his old sensei. To his continued relief, not only was Kakashi fighting, but so were Hayate and Yamato. Mokuton no Jutsu, Yamato shouted as he his hand on the ground. The Nadime flipped himself backwards and easily dodged the wood from the tree that attempted to swallow him up. Hayate was waiting for him when he landed. He formed a small set of seals. Suten, Suiro no Jutsu. To the surprise of the swordsman, he didn't trap him in the water prison but himself. His sword hit the water but his blade stopped like it was made of the strongest earth. The Nadime formed more seals. Suten, Suiruden no Jutsu. The water orb exploded outwards into 4 separate dragon heads. The first 2 one bowled Hayate over who had been standing point blank. The others flew at Yamato and Kakashi. They each their hands on the ground. A wall of mud and a wall of wood rose up to protect them from the incoming water dragons. You wouldn't think it would be so hard to fight a single man. Kakashi was panting heavily from the constant strain of having to use this Sharingan. He was Hokage for a reason. Yamato, however, appeared to be completely refreshed as he fought. Just noticing this brought a strange feeling of ire to the copy ninja. The sound of water rising from behind them caused them both to turn around. 2 swirling vortexes of water were coming right at them. How did he generate the water from behind us? Nadime-sama was known for attacking with Suten from all kinds of directions by combining it with some kind of space-time jutsu. Kakashi explained calmly as they both rolled out of the way of the swirling water that destroyed the barriers they had just created. Kakashi then charged straight at him. Absorb him into the tree while I keep him busy. We've been trying that, Yamato yelled back exasperated. No matter how clever a strategy they came up with, it just wasn't enough to bring the former leader down. It made Yamato wonder what kind of power had been capable of doing it at all. Just then, the sight of the Hokage and Kazekage caught his eye. Kaiten, Karyuden no Jutsu. The Hokage spit out a group of fireballs that flew at his former sensei from behind. Take this. The Kazekage raised his arm and a stream of gold dust flew past him. The gold dust and fireballs combined together to form giant balls of molten gold. The Nadime turned his head towards the sinister attack. Meanwhile, Kakashi formed a small set of seals. Raiten, Reiju Hashiri no Jutsu. His hand glowed with electricity as an electric dog jumped from it and charged at the Nadime from behind. The 2 powerful techniques approached the Nadime quickly from either side, yet the man calmly looked back and forth between them. The techniques collided into each other and Kakashi spun his head around. Yamato, now is your chance. I'm on it, the wood user shouted, already forming the last seal. He smirked victoriously, but it slipped away faster than it came. What's wrong? Kakashi didn't like that look. He's not there. Yamato's voice was laced with his own disbelief. What? Kakashi spun back around and saw the smoke clear to reveal a puddle of water where the Nadaime had been. Damn, a water clone. The Hokage wasn't at all surprised by his sensei's quick escape. Instead, he seemed to have been expecting it, as evident when he turned around to face the man that was now standing behind him. It's been a long time, sensei. Saru, I see you are still Hokage. Tobirama had the smallest of smiles on his face as he looked at his student. Forced back into from retirement, I'm afraid. The old man gave a strained grin back as he settled into a fighting stance. I also see you have allied yourself with Tsunagakure. I am glad relations are improving. Tobirama also settled into a fighting stance. You are awfully curious for AS man. The Kazekage mumbled as he raised his hand up and a katana made of gold formed there. Before any of them made another movement, Hayate appeared from right below, his sword swinging upwards. What? The Nadaime had no chance to react as his hands were clean off from his body. Now is your chance. Hayate back-flipped over both Kage as they ran forward, Sarutobi with his staff and the Kazekage with his golden sword. Stop. That one's a clone too. Kakashi yelled too late as their attack struck it, causing it to explode and ensnare them both in a prison of water. As if something like this could hold me. The Kazekage s his sword forward and they were both freed instantly. Now where did he really go? Over there. Hayate shouted as he pointed towards the sky about 100 yards deeper into the village from where they were. The Nadaime hung at the arc of his jump, seemingly suspended in the air with his hands in a seal. What's he doing? Yamato had a terrible feeling in the pit of his stomach as he felt the surge of chakra being summoned from Tobirama's body. His bad feeling was right on the spot as one by one, dozens of spinning discs of water began to form. There's no way he thinks those will all hit us, does he? The Kazekage folded his arms, unimpressed. When the attacks finally fired off, he realized how wrong he had been. The dozens of water vortexes arced downwards and aimed right for the roots of the giant tree. They into them, quickly obliterating them as they went. Everyone could only wait to see what would happen. After just a couple antagonizing seconds, the sound of creaking reached their ears. The tree slowly but ever so surely began to tip towards the village. The green orbs that continued to hang around the village began flickering, as if the falling of the tree was extinguishing them. The Hokage raised his voice to a boom that could be heard by everyone. Shinobi of Konoha, keep this tree standing no matter what. If it falls, it will flatten close to half the village. As he said this, he immediately moved into action and began to sprint around to the other side. Kazekage Dono, he shouted. I know. The young Kage immediately dropped towards the ground. The second he landed, his hands were up in the air. The huge wave of golden dust he and the Hokage had rode in on rose up and immediately began to rise around the tree in support. A dozen Zaku began flying at him, a barrage of kunai shooting from their stomachs. The gold dust formed around him in a dome that protected him from the attacks. Yamato and the Hokage landed down on the other side of the tree just moments after this happened. It wasn't just them. At least another 100 Konoha shinobi and Tsunagakure shinobi were there as well. All of them whirled long wires that wrapped around the tree and they began heaving with all their might in an attempt to stop it from falling. Enma, extend. Sarutobi shouted as Enma shot forward and then bent and wrapped himself around the giant tree as well. Mokuton no Jutsu. Yamato s his palms into the ground and more roots sprouted forth from it and connected themselves to the tree in an attempt to keep it from leaning any farther. A giant Choza rammed into the tree from the other side and pushed at it with all his might. Everyone who had latched onto the tree with wires slowly began to skid forward slightly as the overwhelming weight of the tree continued to lean forward anyways. Suddenly, a couple of them fell backwards as kunai struck them in the heads. Sarutobi looked up to see the Otogakure shinobi were now targeting all the shinobi trying to hold the tree up. A group of kunai were suddenly flying straight at his head. We'll protect you. Kakashi and Hayate appeared in front of the Hokage and deflected the kunai. They both immediately began to run forward with a group of other shinobi that were charging to defend those holding the tree up. Kakashi. Above, the copy ninja turned his head upwards at the Hokage's shout. To his horror, he saw the Nadaime hanging above everyone who was holding the tree up. He was running through the seal to form more vortexes of water. No you don't. Kakashi jumped skywards and formed a blade of lightning in his hand. Reikiri. The Nadaime wasn't able to dodge in the air and Kakashi's attack through his hands and into his stomach. Impressive, Sharingan warrior. The Nadaime kicked off of Kakashi and landed on the ground, his hands and the hole repairing themselves already. I wonder if you can win by yourself though. There was 5 of you before and you still had trouble. I'll figure something out, Kakashi said calmly as he swung his arm to the side and another blade of lightning formed in his hand. Just as he charged forward he caught sight of his students. What are they doing here? Tenten gave a loud shout as she swung her own chain that slowly began to wrap its way around the trunk of the tree. It took a full 30 seconds due to the size of the trunk before her chain tightened. I got it, she shouted triumphantly and heaved at the tree that was getting more and more crooked. Not even a second later and she was lifted off her feet as the tree picked her up. I don't got it. I don't got it. Damn. Sasuke sighed exaggeratedly as he jumped forward and grabbed onto her ankles. To his displeasure he was also lifted off the ground. Sasuke-kun. Sasuke. Kiba grabbed onto one leg at the calf and Sakura the other. Unsurprisingly they were both lifted into the air too. Oh come on. Sasuke yelled in annoyance. I got you guys. An enlarged Choji easily wrapped one hand each against Kiba and Sakura. Finally, with the sound of a loud creak, enough shinobi had gathered that the tree stopped falling. The group of genin could see the golden dust, growing roots, giant staff, and just about everything else present that was contributing towards holding up the giant tree of Konoha. Let go of me. Let go. Tenten screamed in agony as Sasuke held onto her ankles with a death grip. Let go. Sakura and Kiba asked simultaneously. If you are let go I'll KO you. Sasuke responded loudly. Which is it? Choji asked in confusion. Let go. Don't let go. Uchiha. Sasuke sighed. He knew that voice. A group of Zakis were flying straight at the chain of genin that held onto the tree and unfortunately there was nothing they could do to fight them. Before the Zakis got even a few feet closer however they all split apart as Kakashi landed nimbly in front of them. What the hell do you guys think you are doing? He yelled at them. Helping. They all asked at once. I can't fight a former Hokage and protect you guys from all the Zaku at the same time. He said in annoyance as the Nadaime landed in front of him and he was forced to engage him in Taijutsu. As he did, more Zaku began to fly at the genin. Before they got too much closer they all lost control and crashed onto the ground. A moment later and a group of bugs began to crawl out of the Zaku. Leave defending them to me, Kakashi-san. Shino would be upset if I let any harm befall his teammates. Aberrane General said as he took up a defensive position, his bugs rising out from his body. Thanks, I owe you one. Kakashi nodded as he ran back towards the former Hokage. Now the task falls to you to defeat me. Tobirama walked forward slowly. That tree is still in danger of falling and if you don't hurry, I may be the one to bring it down. Kakashi grinned behind his mask. Don't worry, I won't let that happen. Prove it, Sharingan warrior. Tobirama raised his hands to form more seals but Kakashi was there in an instant. I will, he shouted as he separated the man's hands. He then stepped in lightly and drilled his elbow into the Nadaime's gut. Tobirama stumbled back slightly before settling into a taijutsu stance. Kakashi cartwheeled to him and brought both feet down in a powerful kick that the former Hokage blocked with his forearms. He pushed Kakashi back lightly and stepped in swinging his foot upwards. Kakashi, still standing on his hands, pushed off the ground and into the air, well above the kick. He tucked into a ball and spun incredibly fast before breaking form and swinging down another kick. The Nadaime grabbed this kick, spun around and flung him with all his might. Kakashi sailed through the air but with a simple flip landed on his feet. When he raised his eyes up he was surprised to see a vortex of water already coming right at him. Tobirama frowned deeply as Kakashi was seemingly caught in his attack. His body automatically turned to the right where just 20 yards away the shinobi of Konoha was still struggling to hold the tree up. Don't even think about it. Tobirama looked straight down only for Kakashi's foot to connect with his chin. He was sent scaling into the air. Kakashi flipped into the air and appeared right above him, his elbow drilling into the Nadaime's solar plexus, him into the ground, creating a small crater. Kakashi landed just outside of the crater, panting even more heavily than before. It was clear that he hadn't dodged the last attack entirely as his Chunin vest had vanished completely and his black body suit was littered with big gaping holes. You are at your limit. Tobirama lifted himself out of the crater, unharmed. You are no longer using ninjutsu because you need one that can bind me, yet you don't seem to have one. So you're saving your chakra, waiting for a move that will beat me. Kakashi wiped the sweat from his face as he nodded ever so slightly. I just need to stall you until they get that tree up. Someone will come that can bind you for good. Not good enough. Kakashi's eyes widened as he realized the Nadaime was suddenly behind him. The S-man drilled his elbow into Kakashi's back and S him into the ground full force. You have blown your opportunity to save this village. I'm sorry. The Nadaime turned and began walking towards those holding the tree up. Kakashi placed his elbows on the ground and attempted to heft himself up but collapsed back down. Damn it, this body has had it. Kakashi settled for rolling over onto his back so he could at least watch the Nadaime's retreating form. As he did, he watched two shinobi jump in front of the man, attempting to stop him from making it to those who were holding the tree up. One water jutsu later and they both fell to the ground. The Nadaime raised his hands and began forming more seals. One swirling disk of water opened up next to him. Then another. Soon they began to pop up all around him as he prepared to launch them at all of the shinobi. No. Kakashi again tried to get back up but collapsed to the ground. There's got to be something I can do, something. He grit his teeth as he stared at the Nadaime with all his might. Suddenly, something happened. Kakashi wasn't sure what, but he felt his Sharingan eye change. His vision became more clear for just a second. Then it happened, right in the middle of the Nadaime's back. A rift opened and the area around began to swirl as it got sucked in. The Nadaime turned around in surprise. He then smiled as the rift got bigger and began to pull his now twisting body in. Well done, Sharingan warrior. Those were the last words he said before he got sucked in completely. The water discs he had been forming collapsed completely when the user disappeared. What did I just do? Kakashi suddenly shut his Sharingan eye as it began burning painfully. He let out a yell of pain. Kakashi-sensei. Tenten and Sasuke yelled. They could hardly do anything as they were both still connected to the tree. I'm alright. Kakashi moaned as he slowly began to heft his body up. Another group of Zaku were flying towards him. Crap. I can't dodge. Suddenly, the Zaku began to veer out of control and they crashed into one another. I've got your back, Kakashi. Kurenai said as she crouched down next to him. Kakashi nodded his thanks as she hefted him up. He was just glad he had done it. He had actually beaten a Hokage in battle. Face it, we're lost. Temari sighed as she stumbled through the low brush of the forest. We're not lost. Dosu, Haku, and Zabuza all said together. They all stopped and looked at each other at the same time. Finally, Dosu threw his hands up in the air. Okay, we're lost, he admitted before pointing dramatically at Zabuza. But only because he suggested we take a shortcut. We would have been fine if you guys would have just followed me quietly. Zabuza huffed as he pointed his thumb at Haku. This brat is the one who made us turn back around. If we would have followed my path a little longer we would have been there. But no, the shortcut wasn't short enough for him. Haku opened his mouth to protest but Temari suddenly made a shushing sound. They all immediately grew quiet and crept over to the brush she was using as cover. We're here, she whispered. Just on the other side of the brush was a huge clearing that had a dozen or so Otogakure shinobi pacing around lazily. On the other side of the clearing was the entrance to a cave. Any other ways in? Haku asked hopefully as he turned to Dosu. The boy's brown hair bounced lightly as he shook his head. This is the only entrance but that's okay. These men are the only ones that were left behind at the base. Once inside there are all kinds of traps though, but I'll be able to get us around those. The same way you got us here. Temari asked sarcastically. If we don't take any more shortcuts it will work out just fine. He glared at Zabuza as he talked. Fine, if you don't want to listen to me, just go in without me. Zabuza said as he formed a set of seals. A moment later and a thick mist settled over the clearing in front of them. They immediately heard shouts of panic from within the mist. What? Dosu and Temari asked simultaneously. Just let it go. Haku waved it off. He wants the chance to fight someone for once. As he said that he slipped past the brush they were hiding behind and into the mist. Slowly and hesitantly, Dosu and Temari followed him. They were surprised by how expertly he guided them through the mist and even more surprised that he got them to the entrance of the cave without running them into a single guard. Is Zabuza Sensei going to be okay fighting all of them by himself? Dosu asked as he took the lead and led them into the cave. Suddenly a scream from one of the men caused them all to turn around. It's a demon. Save me. The next noise the man make was the sound of him gurgling on his own bee. Oh yeah, he'll be fine. Haku smiled as the sound of the menace brought back memories of him and Zabuza when they were missing Nin. Right, let's get moving. We need to make a detour. Dosu led them deeper into the cave. Not another shortcut, I hope. Temari didn't like the sound of a detour. No, I just need to go to my room to retrieve something. The sound of a group of footsteps approaching made him smile even bigger behind his rapt face as he slipped invisibly into the mist. 3 men ran to see of the man that had been their ally. What happened to him? The first one to arrive asked as he bent down and checked the man's tea where it looked like he had been by something jagged. The sound of something thumping next to him startled him so badly he almost whirled a kunai. He saw a large round object laying just to his left in the mist. You dropped this, he said as he reached towards it. He was surprised by how wet it felt when he grabbed onto it. With a terrible feeling he slowly grabbed the object and lifted it up. It was the head of one of the men standing behind him. Oh my god, he shouted as he dropped the head. The owner of it finally fell to the ground with another loud thud. Why didn't you notice? He turned to see the other man behind him had vanished entirely. He hadn't even heard his footsteps leave the area. Just what is going on? He got to his feet and quickly began running through the mist. The thing he saw next caused him to rip his mask off a hurl on the spot. 5 more of his men lay completely dismembered on the spot. Takeo. 2 more of his men ran up to him and out of the thick mist. It's terrible. Everyone else is Everyone. The man who had just hurled rose to his feet as he stared at his remaining 2 subordinates. Were Jonan for crying out loud. How many of them are there that we are being wiped out like this? I don't know, sir, but I'm glad I found you. We have to stick together. The other man nodded in agreement to the first man. It was this that caused the leader of the group to narrow his eyes. Wait a second, how did you know where I was? We can't see in this mist at all and yet you ran right up to me. Well, I heard you barfing, sir. The man took a step back nervously. Before he could move another step, the leader of the group stepped forward and into his heart with a kunai. The man puffed into smoke and Zabuza was revealed. Figured you out, the man twisted the kunai before pulling it out. Zabuza slipped down to his knees and gazed up at the man who had him. He then began chuckling as his body began to melt apart. What? Zabuza fell apart into water just as the sound of flesh being splattered reached his ears. He turned to see the real Zabuza standing behind his subordinate that had just been split in half, starting from his head and going down. Why you, demon? The leader fell to his knees as he stared at Zabuza's B-blade. Yes, Zabuza almost purred as he ripped the bandages around his face off and gave a truly horrific smile. Remind me of what it means to be feared as the demon of the B-mist. He stepped forward and rammed his sword right through the middle of the man's sea. Zabuza hefted the man's sea up with his sword before he flung it deep into the mist with a simple flick. How boring, I guess I'll go lend the others my aid after all. Zabuza took a couple steps forward but the sound of another set of steps caused him to stop. From right in front of him, another person slowly materialized. Zabuza wordlessly stepped into the mist before he could be seen. A boy with long white hair tied behind his back slowly stepped around the misty area. He couldn't see any enemy but he smelled a lot of bee. The sound of a sword swinging from behind reached his ears. Kimimaro made no move to get out of the way. Instead, 4 bones shot from his body and completely stopped a giant sword from lopping his head off. Zabuza wordlessly became visible now, his eyes widened in shock at the unexpected defense of his opponent. A former shinobi of Kirigakure. This mist seems nostalgic to me, somehow. As Kimimaro spoke, another bone slowly rose out from his shoulder. He grabbed a hold of the bone and pulled it out, revealing it to be a short blade. When he spun around to strike, Zabuza was already gone. That was unexpected. His voice rang out from inside the fog. A unique Kekkei Genkai perhaps. What clan did you belong to? Kaguya. Kimimaro said in monotone, as he slowly searched the fog. Oh, really? I thought my old village had wiped you all out. Maybe it's fate that we met here in this field. Zabuza's sword appeared again in a straight thrust. Kimimuro's ribcage shot forward and again caught the sword. This time though, when Zabuza pulled his sword back, he found it was trapped. Teshi Senden. Kimimuro held his hand out forward and the tips of his fingers fired off into the mist. The sound of splashing water filled the air and Kimimuro realized he had attacked a water clone. Silence again settled inside the thick mist. I'm curious. Kimimuro called out. Why are you here fighting me? What is your purpose? Purpose? What do you mean? In truth, I hate fighting. However, I must avenge Orochimaru-sama. As his tool, I lived only for his sake. Now that purpose is gone. Kimimuro stared straight out into the mist. Zabuza said nothing from his spot in the mist. Instead he started laughing. You remind me of someone close to me. At least, you're exactly like he used to be. Haku appeared vividly inside Zabuza's mind. I used to fight only for myself. I lived only for myself. Now, I fight because I have something even I want to protect. I won't let you destroy Konoha. I see, this will be a good fight then. Kimimuro slowly began walking. With each step his pace picked up a little and soon he was in an all-out sprint. Where do you think you're going? Zabuza shouted as he appeared right beside him, sword swinging. You can't see me. Kimimuro shouted, his bones extending from his arm and ribs, deflecting the sword. As this happened he stopped hard and swung his own small bone blade forward. Zabuza turned his sword sideways and deflected Kimimuro's strike. Pushing back, he swung his sword. Multiple loud clangs rang through the clearing as they begin a close proximity sword battle. You're fairly skilled for being so young. Zabuza complimented. Kimimuro said nothing as he deflected yet another strike and made a series of quick jabs. Zabuza took a couple of steps backward, leaning slightly to avoid each strike. Unfortunately for you, I am a master swordsman, entrusted with one of the 7 most powerful blades ever created. Zabuza quit his backtrack and swung his sword low, digging it through the earth. As it made an upward arc, it threatened to chop Kimimuro in half. You should know by now that you can't see me. Kimimuro blocked the strike with his bone sword. I can make my blades stronger than steel. You're more naive than I thought if you think I'm trying to see you. As Zabuza shouted, Kimimuro was lifted off the ground by the force of his swing. He now was suspended 5 feet in the air. What? Kimimuro asked in shock. You may be able to block my strikes, but I wonder how well your body will handle being crushed. Zabuza stopped his upward swing and completely reversed the swing of his blade. When it came back around it Kimimuro from above and threw him forcefully into the ground, creating a deep crater in the process. Bones had sprouted out all over the boy's body just in time to absorb some of the shock, however the blow had been too great and Kimimuro spit as his body made contact with the ground. You react quickly but your bones won't be enough to save you now. Zabuza shouted as he swung his sword downwards again. Kimimuro had no chance to move and his body dug a little deeper into the ground. Zabuza repeated the process again. Damn, you. Kimimuro said between clenched teeth, be flowing freely from his mouth. A small mark on his C began to glow orange and lines quickly spread over his whole body. The lines quickly grew bigger and soon his whole body was glowing orange. I don't know what you're doing but it won't work. The ex-mist ninja shouted as he swung again. To his surprise, he felt his legs swept out from underneath, knocking him flat on his back. The hell? He looked up only to be surprised to see that Kimimuro had a tail now. The bone user stood up, his skin now a dark gray color, and 6 large bones protruding from his back. From here on out, I'll be fighting seriously. I hope you're prepared. You thinking changing your form makes you any stronger? Zabuza swung his sword with all his might. I know it does. Kimimuro crossed his arms in front of himself. Zabuza's sword was stopped completely. The bone user pushed back, knocking Zabuza off balance. Damn. Zabuza stumbled slightly off his feet. By the time he regained his balance, Kimimuro was on him. Take this. Kimimuro rammed into him, using the bones on his spikes as spears. Zabuza was barely able to block the bones with his sword in time. He was sent flying backwards where he landed painfully on his back. The ex-Kiri ninja found himself stumbling to his feet once again. When he turned his attention back to his opponent, he was surprised to see him pulling out what appeared to be his spinal cord. What a freaky kid. Zabuza hefted his sword up with just one hand. Tesenka no Mai, Itsuru. Kimimaro pulled his spinal cord completely out. At first it appeared to be a long sword, but when he swung it, the bone quickly took the form of a whip. Zabuza blocked the first strike with ease. He then charged forward and swung his massive blade. Kimimaro tilted his body slightly and Zabuza's sword struck one of his backbones. You should have given up trying to see me down by now. I keep telling you it won't work. Kimimaro swung his whip again and Zabuza jumped high in the air to avoid it. We'll see about that. As long as my blade is intact, I'll find a way to split you wide open. As Zabuza began to fall, he pointed his blade straight down. Then I'll just have to shatter your blade. Kimimaro whispered as he rolled out of the way of Zabuza's descent. The swordsman s into the ground, his sword sinking up to the handle. Where's that confidence in your defense now? Zabuza pulled his sword from the ground with little effort. You shouldn't have needed to dodge that strike with your body. Tesenka no Mai, Hana. Kimimaro ignored the swordsman as bones in his arm began to form a giant spear. This bone is the strongest my body can possibly produce. There will be no breaking this for you. Kimimaro dropped his whip and charged at the ex-mist ninja. We'll see about that. Zabuza matched his charge. As the two neared each other they both pulled their weapons back and then lashed forward. The weapons connected, and Zabuza's sword was completely shattered. Wah! Zabuza didn't get to say any more as Kimimaro's spear continued right on into his shoulder. I had told you all along it was pointless. Kimimaro leaned forward and attempted to spear Zabuza with his back spikes again. Like hell it was. Zabuza dropped his broken sword and grabbed a hold of the spear. He then pushed himself off and stumbled back a couple feet. Winning now is impossible for you. Without your sword you have no chance. Kimimaro straightened himself out and brought his spear up. Not that you had a chance to begin with. Since you're shinobi whose only skill is the sword, my victory was guaranteed. Zabuza chuckled lightly. Something funny. Kimimaro stared oddly at his opponent. Yeah, you think you have this fight all sewn up simply because my blade is broken. I think that's hilarious. Kimimaro frowned slightly at Zabuza's words. Listen kid, I never said my only strength was swordsmanship. That's just your misunderstanding. Then why persist with it to such an extent? I told you it wouldn't work. Kimimaro took a small step forward. I simply enjoy the feeling of getting to lop the head off of my opponent. Staying in such a peaceful village can be relaxing, but it does make it hard to keep up with my old hobby. Zabuza said while laughing. Kimimaro charged forward again. I've wounded you. This fight is over. To his surprise, Zabuza disappeared into the mist they had been fighting in. You think this small scratch is enough to offset this battle? I'm sorry to tell you kid, but I'm a jonin. The only reason you were able to see me this whole time was because I allowed you see me. Zabuza's voice rang from several places at once. Now I'm going to end this battle. How do you intend to do that? Kimimaro stared around the mist once again. Tora, Ushi, Saru. Zabuza began chanting hand seals quietly into the mist. You, Hitsuji, I, Ushi, Uma. Kimimaro quickly began running through the mist, trying to pinpoint the sound. He had to stop him from completing the jutsu. Saru, Tora, Inu, Tora, me, Tora, Ushi, Saru, you. Zabuza's form became visible in the mist, his hands moving quickly as he formed seals. I got you. Kimimaro brought his spear up and charged at him. Tori. Zabuza completed the last seal. Suten, Daibakufu no Jutsu. A ring of water formed in front of Zabuza. The water then shot forward in a great wave and completely engulfed Kimimaro. At first Kimimaro was lifted off of his feet, but by extending his bones to the ground, he was able to anchor himself. With great horror, the bone user realized Zabuza was attempting to drown him. This can't happen. I won't in such a pathetic way. I have to keep living for Orochimaru-sama. With these thoughts constantly repeating in his mind, the bone user took a small step forward. Zabuza's eyes widened in surprise. He could feel his opponent moving slowly but surely through his jutsu. What stubborn will, a bead of sweat rolled down the swordsman's forehead. Using such a powerful water jutsu took a lot of chakra even with a water source. Doing so without one was incredibly taxing on him. Worse yet, if his opponent somehow managed to break free, Zabuza wouldn't have much hope of winning. To further his fear, he saw the tip of the boy's spear break through his end of the vortex. Next, he saw the boy's face slowly start to break through. Impossible, Zabuza stood completely still in front of his opponent. He didn't dare move for fear of disrupting his jutsu. Why you? I won't let you, Kimimaro spoke between coughs of water. Only a small part of his body was out of the water. Slowly, he pulled his spear a little more forward. Inching it forward, the tip poked Zabuza's skin, right where his heart was. DS, for Orochimaru-sama, I'll KU. B slowly began to trickle from the small hole Kimimaro was creating in Zabuza's flesh. Zabuza couldn't help it. He looked at this boy and again he saw Haku. Shaking his head free of the thought, Zabuza closed his eyes. I'm sorry, I'll free you from this miserable existence of living solely for the sake of another. It's too bad you can't be saved like Haku. Maybe if you had met that team, things would have been different. Having finished speaking, Zabuza poured even more chakra into his jutsu. Kimimaro was ripped backwards, his anchors no longer strong enough to support him. Zabuza pumped even more chakra to it. He could feel Kimimaro struggling against it pointlessly for just a few more minutes. Soon, his movement stopped and his body was up against a tree. Slowly, Zabuza began to let up on the jutsu. He watched sadly as Kimimaro's lifeless body fell from his place on the tree and hit the ground. He cautiously approached the body. When he was right next to it, he leaned down and felt for a pulse. It was gone. I'm sorry, the ex-Kiri ninja said quietly to himself before hefting his blade up. He held it under his still openly wound and watched it begin to repair itself. Just then he heard the sound of pounding footsteps. There was an incredible surge of chakra this way. Zabuza smiled evilly as he disappeared back into the mist. Reinforcements were coming, which meant he was still going to have a good time. Dosu admired the new sound manipulator he had just put on with a sense of security. Noticing this, Temari snorted. I can't believe you made us go all that way just to replace your broken toy. Dosu looked up at her indignantly, but Haku responded before he could. It is not so much different from you and your fan, Temari-san. You wouldn't want to enter enemy territory without it, right? Temari glared at Haku before making a grunt that probably meant she conceded the point. The ice user smiled. I thought you'd understand. Dosu nodded his thanks at Haku, who merely smiled back at him. They were slowly but surely creeping through the dank tunnels that were lit only by small lanterns that hung off the walls. Dosu led the way through the traps, with Temari directly behind him, and Haku behind her. One more turn and we should be there. Dosu whispered as he edged his way around the corner after making sure the coast was clear. You sure this is going to be the right place? Temari held onto her fan tightly, ready to swing it at the first notice of an enemy. Positive. Dosu responded instantly. There was a special area in the base that I wasn't allowed in. He has to be there. Why not let you help? Haku rubbed his chin as he thought about it. He probably didn't want me to know anything about it. I was supposed to in the tournament after all. As someone expendable, the less I knew the better. Dosu peeked his head around the last corner and his eyes widened in surprise. Everyone get back, he shouted as he shoved both of them backwards before diving that way himself. Wah! Temari and Haku fell to ground on their butts just as a wave of sand flew over them in what would have been a fatal sweep. Dosu, who had landed on his stomach, rolled over and stood back up in front of his teammates. Kabuto, you bastard, you would place a guard that would be almost impossible to get through. As Dosu said this, the sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears. Each step got louder and louder until finally, a small boy with red hair turned the corner and stood in their path. Jigara, Temari felt her heart wrench in both pain and in fear as she stared at her younger brother. Her younger brother. I'm afraid I can't let any of you go a step further. Gara slowly walked forward and sand burst from his still present gourd that completely sealed off the path behind him. Whoever revived me won't allow it. Haku got up and stared at the small redhead. Gara-san, don't make this difficult. I am a friend of Naruto-san's and as an extension I would like to be a friend of yours. Please let us through. A friend of Naruto's, huh? Gara smiled sadly. I'm afraid even if that is the case, the user has printed specific instructions to attack and KO anyone that tries to get through. As long as you don't try anything, I won't attack. So leave and go back to Naruto. Haku shook his head. I can't do that, Naruto-san is in danger and we need to get past here to save him. Gaara's eyes widened ever so slightly. A moment later and his small smile grew bitter. Then I hope you know a way to get past me. If you are truly a friend of Naruto's, then you should be able to do it. For Naruto-san, we'll definitely do it. Haku raised one hand up and began to form seals. Before he got even to the second one, Gaara's-san shot forward and snatched him. What speed! Haku shouted in surprise. Temari gave a shout of exertion as she swung her still folded fan down, shattering the sand and freeing Haku. Dosu charged straight at Gaara as this was happening. Take this. He swung his arm with the sound manipulator forward. You'll have to do better than that. The sand completely covered Gaara in a dome that protected him from even the sound waves. Quick, Haku, we need a plan. Temari unfolded her fan and turned to her younger teammate. If I can just complete my mirrors, I can get onto the other side. Haku shook himself free of any sand that was still on him. Before he completely blocked it off, I created a mirror on the other end. I just need to make one more to get through. He brought his one hand up, but the sand at his feet shot up and bound his fingers. Can you take anyone with you? Temari asked as she kicked at the sand, freeing Haku's fingers, allowing him to form his last mirror. Dosu, meanwhile, had fallen into a pattern of attacking and rolling away from the sand that struck back. Yeah, I can pull you both through. Haku stepped all the way back into his mirror and held his hand out for her. Temari shook her head. We need someone to stay behind or he'll give chase. His code sounded really simple, so as long as one of us stays back he won't move. So then, I'll stay. Temari, see him off. Dosu is the one that knows the most about this place and you need to be the one to use your mirrors, obviously. So leave it to me. Haku nodded slowly. Thank you, I know this must be hard for you. He turned his gaze towards his other teammate. Dosu. Yeah, I heard. Dosu rolled out of the way of another wave of sand and then immediately charged back towards them. The sand was quickly after him. No, you don't. Temari waved her fan and the sand was buffeted backwards by the strong gust of wind. Dosu jumped forward and stuck his hand out. Haku grabbed a hold of it and pulled him in with one tug. A moment later and they both vanished and the ice mirror shattered. Well then, it looks like it's just you and me, Gaara. Temari said as she readied her fan for the next attack. I'm surprised you would volunteer to stay behind and fight me. Gaara's protective dome lowered and his body was slowly revealed. He smiled at the sight he saw. Temari was putting on a brave face, but her entire body was trembling. You're still terrified of me. Temari shook her head in protest. That's not it. It's not because I'm scared. Liar. You and that oaf of a brother have always been afraid of me. Gaara's sand sprang into action and flew straight at Temari. That was true in the past. Temari admitted as she swung her fan forward. Most of the sand was buffeted to the side, but several strands kept coming for her, forcing her to roll to the side. That's changed now though, Gaara. I'm truly sorry for the way we treated you. Empty words. Gaara spat as more sand sprang forward from his gourd and attacked the blonde. The only one that ever cared was Naruto. He tried his hardest to save me even at the expense of his own life. What have you ever done for me? Temari opened and shut her mouth, but she wasn't able to say anything. She let herself get lost in her memories for just a moment, but it was enough for Gaara's sand to S into her, knocking her over and sending her fan free from her grip. She S into the wall of the cave with a loud crack and slowly slid to the ground. The sand that had assaulted her retreated back into the gourd and on Gaara's back. That's what I thought. You never cared. Gaara slowly turned towards the wall of sand he had erected behind him. Wait, Temari gasped as she leaned forward so she was on her hands and knees. The back of her head bled freely and dripped its way around to her cheeks and rolled off her chin. I'm not done yet. You still intend to try to break through. Gaara turned back and his sand slowly began to rise from his gourd. Temari shook her head. I won't try to get past, I promise. I just want to talk. She shakily got to her feet and began to stumble towards her younger brother. What are you doing? Gaara's sand continued to come out from his gourd. It reached around him and formed a giant defensive claw. I told you, I just want to talk. I want you to know something, Gaara. B trickled down and covered Temari's right eye as she continued to limp her way towards her brother. Stay away. Gaara yelled as she got just within a couple feet. I'll crush you. No, you won't. Temari lunged the rest of the way forward and Gaara's sand instantly shot down, ready to crush her. Just mere centimeters away from doing so and the sand grinded to a halt. Temari hadn't attacked him, but rather, hugged him. Her arms wrapped around his back, squeezing him tightly. Gaara's chin just rested on her shoulder. I don't understand. The feelings inside Gaara suddenly became all jumbled and he lost control of his sand so it collapsed to the ground around them. Gaara, I'm so sorry for the way I treated you. Temari felt tears leak from her eyes as she talked to him. They dripped down her face and mixed in with her bee. I was truly afraid of you. I thought you would kill me at any moment. What are you saying? Gaara asked meekly as he tried pushing himself away from the hug. He clearly lacked the resolve to do so, however, as he only gave a small slight nudges before giving up. He couldn't explain it, but he felt so warm. I'm saying the things I never thought I would get to say to you when You know what I did when I found out Gaara. Temari pulled her face back and loosened her grip slightly so she could look at his face. Gaara shook his head. Stop it. I cried. I cried so hard that I was forced to realize something deep inside of me that I had repressed all this time. Gaara continued to shake his head. Tears slowly began to leak from his eyes now too. Gaara, I loved you. You were my little brother and I loved you. Please, just let go of me. Gaara tried to pull away harder but Temari pulled him in tightly again. No, she said feverishly. I won't let you go this time. Do you remember when we were little kids? Before we really understood what the village thought of you. Gaara couldn't move a muscle now as his tears spilled over her shoulder. We used to play ball together, you, me, and Kankuro. Do you remember what you used to call me? She whispered these words ever so gently. Gaara nodded. Then, say it. Oh, that was the only bit Gaara was able to choke out before his mouth snapped shut. Say it, Oni-chan. Gaara choked out between sobs as he wrapped his arms around her too. He buried his face in her shoulder. That's right, I'm your Oni-chan. Temari and Gaara both sunk to their knees as they held each other. I've always been your Oni-chan. Gaara slowly leaned his head back and looked at her. Temari smiled lightly back him, an effect ruined by her face covered in bee and tears. She brought her hand up and slowly touched Gaara's cheek. To her surprise, the spot she touched began to crumble. Gaara, you had your sand armor on. He shook his head slowly. No, I'm disappearing, he said quietly. What? Temari then noticed Gaara's grip behind her get weaker as his hands and arms began to dissolve into dust. No, Gaara, you can't do this now. I just got you back. I just finally got my little brother back. Oni-chan, I'm S. Gaara told her in a hushed voice. Yet even though I'm S, you've reminded me what it was like to truly be alive again. To be loved by someone. Thank you, tell that to Naruto too. I thank him too. His skin began deteriorating faster and Temari felt her grip began to sink into Gaara's back as that too crumbled apart. No, Gaara, you can't go. I won't let you go. Temari shouted as she began picking up the dirt that had once been his body. She tried placing back on his fast as she could but it wasn't working. Oni-chan. I'm so sorry. Gaara whispered before he crumbled apart completely, leaving Temari with only dirt that slowly trickled through her fingers. Gaara, she choked out as she watched the pile in her hands grow smaller and smaller. She slowly brought it up to her face as she cried into it. Gaara, this is it. Dosu and Haku stood directly in front of two steel doors that sat at the end of the cave. Without any hesitation, they each placed their hands around a big ring attached to the door and pulled. They both swung up easily and the contents of the room were exposed. To both of their surprise, a giant underground pond lay in front of them. Lining the wall on the other side were thousands of monitors that all showed different parts of Konoha. In the middle of the pond was a small island with a giant tube filled with some kind of green liquid. Those screens must each be the view of each of the Zakis, Haku whispered in awe. There were probably 2,000 of them and just barely half of them had been blacked out. More so than the monitor. What about that tube? What do you think is in there? Dosu asked as he took a step onto the water. Without warning he was suddenly blasted backwards as the water violently shot skywards and ejected him from the surface. What the hell? Dosu asked as he was sent spinning through the air. Dosu-san. Haku yelled in surprise. He took a couple steps backwards and managed to catch him before he crashed into the ground. Surprised, they both turned to see a body begin to materialize out of the water. My body is this pond and this pond is my body. You won't be getting across so easily. You're Sugetsu, the younger brother of Mangetsu. Haku said in awe as he set Dosu down on his feet. Oh, you've heard of me? Sugetsu asked in surprise. Of course, I am a student of Momoki Zabuza. Haku stated proudly. Oh, then you would surely recognize this. Sugetsu slowly pulled a giant needle out of the water. Nuibari. Haku breathed out. Of course he knew of that sword. Of all of the 7 swords, that was the one he wanted the most. Even more so than Zabuza's own blade. We're getting off track here. Dosu stamped his foot down and pointed at Sugetsu. Tell us how to stop Zaku. The sound of familiar laughter echoed across the cave before Sugetsu could answer. You can't stop me. That's impossible. Zaku. Dosu shouted as he began scanning around the cave for his former teammate. Where are you? Right here. Dosu's eyes locked in on the green tube. What he saw caused both of his eyes to go wide. Floating in the middle of the liquid was the dismembered head of Zaku. Zaku, what happened to you? Dosu couldn't believe his old teammate was nothing more than just a head in a tube. He clenched his fists in anger. What the hell did you let Kabuto do to you? Zaku continued to laugh maniacally as it swam around the tube in zigzags. I let him make me powerful. Zaku. Dosu took a couple steps closer but immediately a stream of water broke out of the pond and attacked him. No you don't. Haku formed a group of one-handed seals and the water froze in its tracks. Dosu, you get over to Zaku. I'll deal with this guy. If he is made of water that means I have the advantage. Don't make that sound so easy. As long as he touches water, I can halt his movement. Sugetsu bragged as he tapped his foot lightly on the water. That's presuming I touch it at all. The seal on Dosu's end quickly spread to his whole body and then a moment later it began to envelope his whole skin. His spiky, brown hair turned long and white and his skin gray. His toes and fingers became hooked, and wings spread under his arm span. Finally, his ears turned triangular and jutted sideways. Oh, Zaku was laughing again. And you yell at me for what I let Kabuto did to me body. What about your own? This is different. I can still walk around. I'm not stuck in a tube. Dosu flapped his wings and immediately took off towards the ceiling of the cave. Even if you fly you can't get past me. Sugetsu shouted as the water began to rise towards Dosu. You have me to deal with. Haku shouted as he appeared in front of Sugetsu. He swung his katana and lopped his opponent's head clean off, only for it to turn into water and then splash into the pond. Sugetsu laughed as his head reformed itself. That won't work. As long as I am on this pond, I can't S. The water around Haku's feet began wrapping around his legs. Meanwhile, Dosu was still flying madly around as he tried to avoid being S by the water trailing after him. Then I'll just have to get you off the pond. Haku created an ice mirror right behind Sugetsu while freezing the water that was attempting to bind his legs. He then jumped forward and tackled Sugetsu into the mirror. A moment later and they both fell out of one on the outside of the pond. Damn! Sugetsu shouted as he rolled on the rocky ground. The water that had been trailing Dosu collapsed back into the pond as Sugetsu lost control of it. He got up and immediately began to sprint for it, but before he got even more than a couple steps he was completely surrounded by mirrors of ice. You're not going anywhere. An image of Haku appeared inside each mirror. You shouldn't underestimate me or the power of Nuibari. Sugetsu shouted as he held the giant needle forward. A long wire was attached to a loop at the bottom of the blade. You shouldn't underestimate my Kekkei Genkai. Haku shot back as he pulled out several senbon needles. A moment later and a dozen of them littered the ground and Sugetsu's body was covered in tiny holes. Hey, that didn't hurt at all. He gave a shark-like smile. And you fell for my trap. It was then that Haku noticed the wire on the end of Nuibari was leading right to him. Haku looked down in surprise to see the wire led right to his arm. When did you? The moment you stepped out of your mirror. You're not the only fast one around here. Sugetsu gave a massive tug and Haku was pulled out of his mirror and straight towards his opponent. Now take this. Sugetsu's knee drilled into Haku's stomach, knocking the wind from his body. Yet another moment later and Haku felt his whole arm go numb as Sugetsu used Nuibari to sew his arm to the side of his stomach. Now for your other arm. Sugetsu still had a razor-sharp smile as he raised Nuibari up high. You seem to have forgotten I only need one hand to make seals. Haku shouted as he immediately formed 3 seals. His hand began to glow bright blue for just a second as he s it into Sugetsu's face. The sharkish boy only laughed. What do you think that would do against me? I'm made of water. Precisely. Haku smirked as he watched Suigetsu's body began to freeze. What did you do to me? Sugetsu asked in horror. He could do nothing as his body turned into solid ice. This is my win. That means Nuibari is mine. Those were the last words Sugetsu ever heard before he froze completely and then crumbled apart. Haku bent down and picked up the sword. This is going to take time to unsew myself. You're on your own, Dosu. Dosu's super sensitive hearing just barely managed to pick up Haku's words. That's a hell of a lot of pressure to put on a guy who has only been a Konoha shinobi for a few hours. He shouted loudly. He was closing in on the tube that held Zaku. A Konoha shinobi? Zaku asked while laughing. You really have fallen low, Dosu. I don't want to hear that from you. Dosu dive-bombed at the tube. Before he was able to react, a giant air cannon rose from the top and fired, blasting into Dosu with such force that he was sent spiraling out of control. He crash-landed on the miniature island in the middle of the pond and his curse seal then receded completely. Damn it, I'm still worn out from my fight with Lee. Need help. Zaku laughed as 2 mechanical pincers at the end of large metallic cords came out and grabbed onto either of Dosu's arms. They hefted him into the air and brought him right in front of the tube. Zaku's head then floated up to meet him. You see what being a part of Konoha got you. You should have just quit and fled from the village. Now you're going to a meaningless death. My life isn't meaningless. Dosu whispered fiercely under his breath. Konoha taught me that as long as you try, nothing is meaningless. Zaku sneered at his former teammate as he talked. And you know what else they taught me? For once, Zaku was completely quiet. They taught me to never give up. Dosu pulled his head back and then headbutted the glass tube with all his might, creating a massive crack. No. Zaku threw him to the ground and immediately began trying to push at the giant crack with his mechanical pincers. A small amount of water was leaking out of it. Sorry, Zaku. You lose. Dosu sat up and flicked his sound manipulator with his finger. The sound wave hit the cracked glass and shattered it completely. Dosu. Zaku screamed as his dismembered head fell out of the tube and landed on the hard, rock surface. The head began to make strange gasping noises for a few moments and Dosu could only watch in pity as the green liquid that had sustained his former teammate's life drained into the lake. Finally, after a few long antagonizing seconds, Zaku's B dripped down Dosu's forehead and into one of his eyes, but he didn't care. Instead he let himself fall backwards so he could stare at the ceiling of the cave. We did it. Haku stepped up onto the small island. Yeah, we did it. The Zaku that had buzzing around nastily suddenly all began to collapse and crash into the ground all at once. Taking note of this, the shinobi of Konoha and Suna began cheering as they renewed their efforts to save the tree and fight off the remaining Otogakure shinobi. Everyone, just a little more. Hiruzen shouted as he began pulling with newfound strength. The tree was slowly but surely beginning to fall back into place with everyone's combined efforts. Choza pushed from the other side along with the Kazekige's golden dust jutsu. Meanwhile, Yamato finished repairing all the roots. Finally, the tree stood completely upright. All of the glowing green orbs that had been flickering out made a collective sheen noise as they returned back to their full strength. A chorus of cheers rang out from all of the Konoha and Sunagakure shinobi. They all dropped their wires and immediately charged up to aid those who were still in combat. The remaining Otogakure shinobi became hopelessly outnumbered. The Kazekige collapsed to his knees, gasping heavily. Hiruzen ran up next to him. Kazekige Dono. Are you well? Of course I am. The Kazekige inhaled deeply and shakily got to his feet. What are you standing around me for? This battle isn't over yet. Hiruzen smiled. The battle may not be over, but thanks to your efforts, victory is within sight. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.